We have a very sick and corrupt electoral process that must be fixed immediately. This election was rigged.
So that was former President Trump a short time ago. I'm sure you recognize him. He was leaning on his false rhetoric about the 2020 election during his return to the political stage at CPAC. I am now joined by former acting Homeland Security Secretary under Trump and visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Chad Wolf. Thanks for coming on, Chad.
Well, thanks for having me.
So as we just saw there, your former boss continues to push this big election lie that he actually won when he didn't, we know. Your department found no issues with the election. So what is your response to Trump and Republican lawmakers who are still propagating this lie?
Well, I think it's important to be clear about what DHS found and didn't find after the election. The department is very much in control of, and our responsibilities regarding the election had to do with cyber and making sure that the election was free of any foreign influence, and of course we did that. What President Trump has talked about since Election Day and continues to talk about is more of the election fraud and how perhaps different individual states changed their voting procedures and not going through their state legislature. Those two issues, the Department of Homeland Security has almost no oversight on. So I think it's important for your viewers and others to realize what the department said at the time and what our authorities are. So I think it's certainly—
They said the systems were safe. There is a difference between the systems and foreign interference and fraud. We should note there were more than 250 lawsuits before the election on these rule changes that went around the state legislatures. After, there was more than 60. Republicans, Bill Barr, they have all said there was no widespread fraud. So what is your reaction?
I mean, I have not seen any information, any data that said that the election would have turned out differently. But I think what the president has talked about and what I think a vast majority of Americans see, that there is some fraud inherent in our voting system, and it needs to be addressed before the next midterm or certainly the next presidential election.
I don't know if it's fair to say that a vast majority believes there's fraud inherent in the system. The percentage of fraud based on, I believe, Heritage database is less than 0.001%.
Again, well, I think you two different issues here. So we have the fraud, and then we have the different voting systems that were in place because of the COVID restrictions and how those changed at the last minute. So again, I think you're conflating two different issues. If you look at both of those individually and separately, I think there are concern out there that needs to be addressed before we continue to make election changes at the last minute. So I think
that has
that's
all
what
been litigated, but I don't want to belabor this because and we were clear. There's the machines, and then there was these rule changes that were litigated ad nauseum. But that's not to say you can't have a robust debate moving forward, looking ahead to the next election about that. But I want to turn really quick to the riot, the Capitol riot. You have said the responsibility for security at the U.S. Capitol is with Capitol Police, but this is how former Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund testified this week.
A clear lack of accurate and complete intelligence across several federal agencies contributed to this event, and not poor planning by the United States Capitol Police.
So he also talked about DHS not raising the alert level, and as we know, you didn't declare it as a national special security event that would have called for Secret Service protection. What do you have to say to that and what we just heard from Sund?
Again, all the information that I have and the intelligence I saw sort of contradicts what the former police chief was saying there. And I think you have a number of experts that have gone on the records to say this is not an intelligence failure. This is a failure of imagination and making sure that there was not proper planning done at the U.S. Capitol. If they had a plan in place, it wasn't well executed, whether it was not having enough officers or not putting enough protective measures in place prior to that event. All I can say is what we did at the department, knowing that you had a very large rally on January the 6th that was coming. We put measures in place for DHS-protected facilities around the National Capital Region inside of D.C. And I know National Park Police did the same, as well as other law enforcement agencies. Why the Capitol Police did not take that extra step, again, is part of this investigation.
So let's unpack that a little bit, because basically it sounds like what you're saying is DHS did everything right. You told ABC News after the fact that you knew of the threat that up to 35,000 people were coming to the district. You also said in this report from October that domestic violent extremists pose a significant threat that, quote, probably will depend on political or social issues. In this case, they were broadcasting in chat rooms what they were going to do ahead of time. So why wasn't more done by DHS? What can be learned from this by the department? Of course, law enforcement agencies are going back to scrutinize. What about DHS?
Well, sure. I think all law enforcement agencies need to take a hard look at what they did leading up to the 6th and certainly on the day of. What I can tell you from the department is the information that we have, the intelligence that we received from the Department of Justice and others did not indicate that they were storming the Capitol, not the information that I received. We had general intelligence to say that there was going to be a very large group, 25 to 35,000 folks, likely going to be violent. There were going to be counter protests. And so that's the way we had geared up. And we had seen that over the course of several months, really before the election day and after the election day. So we knew what was coming. This idea that you didn't have any idea of the magnitude of the event is just a false narrative out there. Again, it's why we surged in individuals, DHS law enforcement, and it's why we had National Guard on standby. They were deployed elsewhere in the city for a variety of different reasons. And whether or not the Capitol Police had enough officers, I think that, again, will be part of the investigation. But I think a really hard look needs to be at what plans and procedures did the Capitol Police have to defend the Capitol, and were those sufficient or not?
Just help me understand this a little bit. And you point out, look, we didn't have anything specific of, hey, we're going to storm the Capitol. But you did say there was a failure of imagination. And that, I imagine, would be shared by all law enforcement. But at the same time, we had seen examples in Michigan when armed protesters had stormed the State House and tried to go on the floor and so forth. You had told ABC that after the riot that you knew of the threat and had planned for the worst. But the Wall Street Journal obtained a DHS intelligence national summary from January 5th that said, quote, nothing significant to report. The FBI, on the other hand, its Norfolk field office shared a bulletin that there was concerning chatter that extremists were planning to travel to Washington to commit violence in war. How is that not a massive law enforcement and intelligence failure?
Again, I don't see your exact point. What I would say is the information that we received, DHS, and again, we collect most of our intelligence. We are a consumer of intelligence from the intelligence community, and then we'll do some open source reporting as well. And I know the Bureau, obviously a different law enforcement agency, has their own ways of getting information, and we'll pass that along as well. But again, this idea that if you're the Capitol Police or any other law enforcement agency inside D.C., and again, we're on multiple phone calls leading up to the 6th, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, along with Metropolitan Police Department, all sharing the same information that we have at the time, which is 25 to 35,000 folks coming, likely going to be violent, likely going to have protests, counter protests. Everyone, that's what your job is as a law enforcement agency, is to plan for the worst, hoping that it never comes. And that's what we did at the department. I know that's what others did. And I think that's what, the investigation and the review will find on whether or not Capitol Police did that, or whether or not they didn't, or they backed off on some of their measures for a variety of different reasons that I think we'll have to see.
Okay, we have to move on because of time. I think there are still some open questions, too, about what you laid out, about why the threat level wasn't alerted. But all of this is going to be raised, I should say. All of this will, of course, be looked at. It's important to hear your perspective as someone who was leading DHS at that time. But there will be a 9/11-style commission looking at all of this. So this conversation will continue. But I appreciate you laying out your side of the story. I want to get to immigration, though, before we let you go, because you, of course, were at Trump DHS. You were working for Kirstjen Nielsen when the child separation policy went into effect. Lawyers say that more than 500 children who were separated from their parents at the border during the Trump administration have not been reunited with their parents. Does that still weigh on you at all?
Well, what I can tell you is it's been 2.5 years since that the zero tolerance policy ended. And in those 2.5 years, the department, working with a number of nonprofits and others, have gone back to look for parents, look for the children, reunite them as we could. What I will tell you is many of those parents obviously have been deported back to Central America and have chosen to keep their children here in the U.S. So I think we need to realize what really is going on.
So you
here.
say many. How many? Because you've said that before. I just want to. Where are
Yeah.
you getting that information? And can you be more specific on how many parents?
It's in the court filings. The Department of Justice in that court proceeding, again, 2.5 years old, lays out how many have been contacted, how many have been located, how many have chosen to allow their children to remain here in the United States. And of course, at the beginning of your segment, you talked about, the dangerous journey. And that's what's concerning to me right now is that you have some rhetoric, you have some policies and executive orders that are pushing children, pushing families into the hands of smugglers and traffickers, trying to take this very dangerous journey up here to the southwest border in the hopes that they will remain in the U.S. as their immigration proceeding goes forward. So again, a lot of different and dangerous things occurring right now.
And we are seeing a concerning rise in the number of unaccompanied migrant children crossing the border. Chad Wolf, thank you for coming on. I hope that we can continue this discussion on these important topics.
All right, thank you.